Dad smashed my head into dinner in front of everyone, and Mom just laughed, saying at least now I was worth seeing. Before I go further, let me just say this. Stay with me through this story. It's not easy to tell, but maybe it will make someone out there feel less alone. I was 17 the night it happened, though the truth is it wasn't the first time my parents humiliated. But this one stuck like a scar I couldn't scrub away. We had family over, cousins and uncles I barely saw, and the house smelled of roasted chicken and mashed potatoes. I remember trying to stay quiet, keeping my head down because that was always safer. But my dad, Richard, decided that night I was too quiet. He said something like, "Look at her. She's so useless she can't even join a conversation." Everyone chuckled awkwardly. I felt my face flush, but I kept my mouth shut. Then suddenly, without warning, he grabbed the back of my head and shoved it down into my plate. My face sank into the warm potatoes, the butter smearing across my cheeks, and the table erupted with laughter. I gasped, choking on food, pulling myself back up. I wanted to disappear, to melt right there under the table. My mom, Laura, didn't stop him. She didn't say a word to protect me. Instead, she smirked and said, "At least now you're worth looking at." Her tone was sharp, cruel, and it stung worse than the mashed potatoes sticking to my head. The rest of the night, I sat there with a burning face and watery eyes while everyone else carried on as if nothing had happened. My brother, Kyle, was laughing the loudest. He was always the favorite, the one they spoiled, while I was treated like I was nothing. That night was more than just humiliation. It was a confirmation. It told me exactly what my parents thought of me. Not once did anyone check on me or ask if I was okay. I remember staring at the food on my plate, not tasting a bite, and thinking, I don't belong here. I don't even exist to them except as a joke. When I went to bed later, I cried into my pillow until it was damp, but the tears weren't just sadness anymore. Something else was taking root, anger, deep and sharp. I kept replaying the sound of my mom's laugh, the way she enjoyed seeing me crushed. I told myself I would never forget. That dinner table became the turning point. To my parents, it was just another cruel game, but to me, it was a moment burned into memory. It was the night I stopped hoping they'd change, and the night I started to build a wall inside myself. A wall that one day would keep them out forever. Growing up, my house was never really a home. It was a place where words cut sharper than knives, where silence felt safer than speaking. From as far back as I can remember, my dad, Richard, had a way of breaking me down piece by piece. He never missed a chance to remind me that I was ugly, that I was useless, that I was a mistake they should have never had. Those words weren't just thrown out in anger. They were repeated so often they became the background noise of my childhood. My mom, Laura, wasn't any better. She never stood between me and my dad's cruelty. Instead, she joined in, laughing at his insults, adding some of her own. She'd make comments about how I dressed, how my hair never looked presentable, or how my smile made me look awkward. She loved to compare me to my younger brother, Kyle. To her, Kyle could do no wrong. He was handsome, smart, the one worth bragging about. She spoiled him with love and attention, showering him with gifts while I stood in the corner, watching as if I didn't belong to the same family. It wasn't just at home either. Whenever extended family came over, they treated Kyle like the golden child. My aunts would pinch his cheeks, praising him for being clever, while I'd sit quietly, invisible. If I tried to join in, someone would find a way to mock me or correct me until I wished I had stayed silent. At family gatherings, if I sat at the table, I was often ignored unless it was to point out something wrong about me. My cousins learned from my parents that I was the one to laugh at, not with. There were moments when I looked around and wondered if anyone saw me, if anyone realized how much it hurt. But no one did. They either didn't care or they thought it was normal, that I should just toughen up. The truth is, it wasn't normal. It was cruelty dressed up as family banter, and it left scars no one could see. Over time, I learned to hide my anger. I stopped arguing back because it only made things worse. I swallowed my words, kept my head down, and tried to survive each day. But inside, something was changing. Every insult, every laugh at my expense, every moment of neglect planted something dark inside me. I didn't cry in front of them anymore. I didn't give them the satisfaction. Instead, I stored those moments away like weapons, each memory sharp enough to cut when the time was right. I told myself I would never forgive them. Not for the names they called me, not for the way they treated me like a shadow while Kyle basked in their light. One day, I promised myself they would see me, not as the mistake they thought I was, but as the daughter who would rise without them. The day I turned 18, I packed my bags and left home without looking back. College wasn't just about education for me. It was an escape, the only chance I had to breathe without my father's insults or my mother's cruel laughter hanging over. I had earned a small scholarship, not nearly enough to cover everything, but just enough to get me through the door. The rest I had to figure out on my own. At first, life wasn't easy. I lived in a tiny dorm room with paint peeling from the walls and a bed that creaked every time I moved. My meals were mostly cheap ramen noodles or peanut butter sandwiches, and I stretched every dollar until it hurt. Between classes, I worked part-time at the library and sometimes cleaned houses on weekends. I came home exhausted most nights, but I reminded myself that exhaustion from work was better than the exhaustion of being torn down every single day. For a while, I kept to myself. I was so used to being invisible that it felt safer not to expect anything from anyone. Then one afternoon in the library, I met someone who would change everything. His name was Michael Harris. He wasn't loud or showy. He just had a way of noticing me. He'd ask if I wanted to join him for coffee after study sessions, or he'd hold the door open a second longer, just to make sure I made it through. Small things I had never experienced before. At first, I didn't trust it. I kept waiting for the punchline, for the moment he'd laugh at me the way my family always had. But Michael never did. He listened when I spoke, even when I stumbled over my words. He noticed when I was tired and offered to help carry my books. He told me I was smart, that I had good ideas. Words I had never heard before suddenly felt possible. Little by little, my walls started to crack. One night, after a long study session, he walked me back to my dorm. We stopped under the glow of a street lamp, and he said softly, "Emma, you deserve better than whatever made you so afraid to be seen." Something in me broke open that night. For the first time in my life, I believed maybe he was right. Michael became my first real friend, and before long, he became more than that. He was the first person who made me feel valued, not for what I could do, but simply for who I was. With him, I started to imagine a life that didn't include shame or fear. For the first time, I felt hope. Hope that I wasn't destined to remain the broken girl my parents made me. Hope that I could create a future where I was not only seen but cherished. When Michael asked me to marry him, I felt like my whole life had finally taken a turn toward the light. He knelt under a quiet oak tree on campus where we had first met, his hands trembling as he held out a ring. I didn't even let him finish his sentence before I said yes. For the first time, I believed happiness could be mine. As the wedding plans unfolded, I wrestled with a decision that gnawed at me more than choosing a dress or a venue, whether or not to invite my family. Part of me wanted to leave them behind completely. They had never cared for me, and I owed them nothing. But another part, the little girl inside me who still longed for their approval, whispered that maybe this time things could be different. Maybe on the most important day of my life, they would finally act like family. So I sent them invitations. On the day of the wedding, as I slipped into my gown, I felt nervous but hopeful. That hope began to crumble the moment my mother walked into the bridal room. Laura's eyes scanned me from head to toe, her lips curling into that familiar smirk. "That's the dress you chose," she said. "It doesn't flatter you. Makes your shoulders look broad." My hands shook as I adjusted the lace, forcing a smile, pretending her words didn't cut as deeply as they did. During the ceremony, I avoided their eyes. I focused on Michael, on the vows we exchanged, on the future we were building. But the reception was where the nightmare unfolded. My father, Richard, took the microphone during the toasts. Instead of speaking with pride or kindness, he joked that it was a miracle anyone would want to marry Emma. Laughter rippled through the room, awkward and forced, but I caught the look on Michael's parents' faces. Their shock, their discomfort, their quiet glances at me. My cheeks burned with shame. As if that wasn't enough, Kyle, my brother, decided to make himself the center of attention. He stumbled to the stage, clearly drunk, and began telling embarrassing childhood stories about me. He exaggerated them, turning them into jokes that made me sound pathetic, weak, laughable. The room laughed along, not realizing each word was another knife in my chest. I sat there at my own wedding, watching the people who should have loved me tear me apart. I realized then, with painful clarity, that nothing had changed. No matter how much I had grown, no matter how far I had come, they would always see me as the girl to mock. That night, when the guests had gone and the music faded, I sat with Michael in our hotel room. My mascara was smeared, my heart heavy. I turned to him and whispered, "I'm done. I can't keep letting them hurt me." He wrapped his arms around me, and in that moment, I chose my new life. My family had lost me forever. Several years passed, and life had turned into something beautiful I never thought I'd have. Michael and I built a quiet, steady happiness together. We both had good jobs, a small but cozy house, and a circle of friends who felt more like family than the people I shared blood with ever did. For the first time, I woke up each morning without the heavy weight of shame pressing down on me. I had escaped, and I thought I was free. Then the phone call started. It was my father, Richard, his voice stripped of the authority he used to wield like a weapon. He told me he had lost his job and couldn't find another. His confidence was gone, replaced with desperation. He danced around the point at first, but eventually the truth came out. He needed money. Not long after, my mother called. Laura's voice was weaker than I remembered. She explained she had been in and out of hospitals, her health declining, bills piling up. She spoke as if we had been close all along, as if years of neglect and cruelty had never happened. She said she needed her daughter. And then there was Kyle. He wasn't the golden child anymore. Years of gambling had drained him, and now he was in debt, drowning in numbers he couldn't pay back. He begged me for help, insisting that I was his only hope. The irony of it all struck me so deeply I almost laughed. The same family who had shoved me down, mocked me, treated me as less than human, now turned their hands toward me as though I was their savior. Every word they spoke replayed memories I had tried to bury. My father's voice calling me useless, my mother's laugh as my face was shoved into food, Kyle's jeers echoing in my ears. Each plea they made brought those old wounds back to life. But this time I wasn't powerless. I felt the anger rise in me, but it wasn't the wild, desperate anger of a child begging to be loved. It was something sharper, colder. For years, I had carried their cruelty inside me like stones in my chest. And now, for the first time, I realized I could drop that weight, or I could use it. I decided I wouldn't ignore them, because ignoring them would let them slip quietly into misery. No, I wanted them to feel it, to taste the same bitterness they had fed me my entire life. They had taught me about humiliation, about betrayal, about being cast aside when you needed someone most. Now it was my turn to teach them. When I hung up the phone that night, Michael looked at me with concern. I just smiled faintly and said, "They want me to save them, but I think it's time they finally learn what it feels like to be abandoned." I made the first move. I called my parents back and told them I was willing to help. My voice was soft, steady, the kind of voice they had never heard from me before. I could almost feel the relief pouring through the phone line. My father sighed loudly, pretending he wasn't desperate, while my mother's voice cracked as she told me she knew I'd come around eventually. I began showing up once a week, carrying bags of groceries in my arms. I watched the way my father's chest puffed up, as if he was still the one in control, as if me helping them was proof that I had finally realized they were right all along. My mother would smile smugly, brushing her hair back and saying, "See, Richard, she knows where her place is." They thought they had won me back, that all the years of cruelty had been erased just because I was standing in their kitchen again. But what they didn't know was that every time I handed them a receipt, every time I covered a bill, every time I left their house, I was taking mental notes. I watched how my father acted entitled to my help, how my mother gloated about me to relatives, bragging that her daughter was so successful now, and she finally appreciates us. I let them believe it. I let them soak in that false sense of victory. I kept my phone on record more than once when they slipped and spoke their true feeling. Richard bragged to a neighbor that he had me, right where he wanted me. Laura mocked me behind my back, saying I was trying too hard to make up for being a disappointment. I saved it all. Every cruel laugh, every cutting word carefully filed away. At the same time, I made sure to give them just enough support to get comfortable. I paid one overdue utility bill, dropped off enough groceries to fill their pantry for a week, even slipped Kyle a little money to cover his urgent debt. They became dependent quickly, like addicts to a drug. And every time they reached for me, I stepped a little closer, smiling sweetly while plotting exactly how I'd pull it all away. I knew they didn't see it coming. In their minds, I had returned as the obedient daughter they could manipulate and control. But inside, I was steadying my hand on the knife they had sharpened for me long ago with their abuse. Michael asked me one night if I was sure about what I was doing. I looked at him across the dinner table, calm and certain. "They taught me betrayal," I said softly. "I'm just giving it back to them." They thought I was their savior. What they didn't know was that I was patiently waiting for the moment to let their world collapse in on itself. And this time, I would be the one laughing. Kyle came to me one evening, his voice dripping with false confidence. He said he had a business idea, something vague about opening a sports bar with a couple of his buddies. He spoke fast, throwing around words like investment, profit, and easy money. But I knew him too well. This wasn't ambition. It was desperation dressed up as opportunity. Still, I nodded along, pretending to be interested. When he asked me to co-sign a loan, I acted hesitant at first, like I was torn. I let him beg, let him plead, until finally I sighed and said, "All right, but only if we do it the right way." His eyes lit up. He thought he had me exactly where he wanted me, just like my parents thought they did. What none of them realized was that I had been waiting for this moment. I made sure I was protected. I went over the paperwork with a fine-tooth comb, bringing in a lawyer who crafted it, so there was no way any responsibility could fall on me. Kyle signed without reading, his arrogance blinding him. He believed I would always be there to bail him out if things went wrong. Meanwhile, I began pulling back from my parents. No more grocery runs, no more utility bills mysteriously paid off, no more surprise bags of essentials left at their door. At first, they brushed it off, assuming I was just busy. But weeks passed, and the refrigerator grew emptier, The stack of unpaid bills on the counter grew taller, and the smugness in their voices started to crack. Richard called me, his tone sharp, demanding to know why I hadn't helped with the mortgage that month. I reminded him, gently, that I never promised to pay for their lives. Laura tried a softer approach, calling late at night with a shaky voice, saying she hadn't been feeling well, that stress was making her sicker. I listened politely, but I didn't offer a single dime. The panic set in slowly, like water rising in a room they couldn't escape. Their savings dried up. Creditors started calling. For the first time, my parents, who had spent years making me feel powerless, now felt the cold grip of helplessness. And then Kyle's business began to crumble before it even started. His partners bailed, the bank demanded payments he couldn't make, and the legal responsibility landed squarely on his shoulders. He stormed into my house one afternoon, red-faced and furious, shouting that I had set him up. Michael stood beside me, calm but firm, while I simply looked at Kyle and said, "You signed your own name. That's on you." For the first time, I watched the golden child fall apart. I watched my parents realize their perfect son couldn't save them, and I wasn't going to either. The safety net they thought I would provide was gone. All that was left was the emptiness they had once forced me to live in. Now it was their turn. It was late in the evening when the knock came. Hard, impatient, the kind of pounding that rattled the doorframe. I already knew who it was before I even looked through the glass. My father, Richard. When I opened the door, he didn't bother with pleasantries. He barged in, his face red, his hands trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. "You think this is funny, Emma?" he shouted, pacing across my living room. "Your mother is sick, I'm drowning in bills, and your brother, your own brother, is in trouble. And here you are, living in comfort, acting like we don't exist." I stood still, my arms crossed. For years, his voice had been the sound of my nightmare. But now, it washed over me like nothing more than background noise. Michael sat silently on the couch, watching, ready to step in if he had to, but I gave him a small shake of my head. This was my battle. Richard's eyes blazed as he pointed a finger at me. "Ungrateful. That's what you are. After everything we gave you, after the roof over your head, the food on your plate, this is how you repay us? You're cruel, Emma. You're no daughter of mine." I felt a cold calm settle over me. For years, I had waited for this moment, the chance to finally speak without fear, to let him hear the truth he had buried under his pride. I took a step closer, my voice low but steady. "Do you remember that night? The dinner when you smashed my face into mashed potatoes in front of everyone?" He froze, his jaw tightening, but I didn't stop. "Do you remember how Mom laughed and said at least I was worth looking at? Do you remember Kyle pointing at me, mocking me like I was some circus act? That was the night you lost me, Dad. You just didn't realize it yet." His mouth opened, but no words came out. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. I could see the flicker in his eyes, the memory he couldn't deny. For once, he wasn't the one holding power. I leaned in slightly, my voice firm. "You want to talk about ungrateful? I spent my entire childhood begging for a scrap of kindness from you, and you gave me nothing but shame. You want to talk about cruelty? You taught me what cruelty was. Now you're just tasting what you fed me all those years." Richard's face twisted, a mixture of rage and something that looked dangerously close to shame. He clenched his fists, then turned on his heel. Without another word, he stormed out of my house, slamming the door behind him. I stood there in the quiet, my heart steady, my hands no longer trembling. For the first time, my father had walked away defeated, humiliated, exactly the way he had left me so many times before. This time, I was the one standing tall. Laura sat in the dim light of her cluttered living room, the unpaid bills stacked high on the coffee table like a monument to failure. The walls, once proudly decorated, now carried a heaviness that pressed down on her chest. With trembling hands, she picked up her phone and dialed Emma's number. When Emma answered, her voice was calm but distant. "Hello, Mom." Laura's words tumbled out in a mix of desperation and feigned warmth. "Emma, sweetheart, I know things were bad, but you have to understand we're family. Families fight, but they forgive. Can't we start over? Please, I'm begging you. Forgive us." Emma closed her eyes, her grip tightening around the phone. Her mother's voice, once sharp and mocking, now carried a whimpering tone. It was almost pitiful, but Emma had learned long ago that pity was a trap. "Forgiveness," Emma said evenly, "is not the same as forgetting. I could forgive you 100 times, but that doesn't erase the years of cruelty, the laughter at my pain, the way you all crushed me. I will not go back." On the other end, Laura sniffled, her tone shifting to guilt. "We raised you, Emma. We gave you a home. Don't we deserve something for that?" Emma's laugh was hollow, stripped of any warmth. "A home? You mean the place where Dad smashed my head into a plate of food, and you laughed like it was a joke? Where Kyle mocked me until I cried myself to sleep? That wasn't a home. It was a cage. And I'm done letting you rattle the bars." The silence that followed was suffocating. Laura finally whispered, You're cruel. You're abandoning us." "No," Emma replied, her voice steady as steel. "You abandoned me years ago. I'm just cutting the cord that tied me to your misery." And with that, she ended the call. Meanwhile, Kyle's grand business venture crumbled within weeks. The loan Emma had cleverly tied his name to turned into a mountain of debt he couldn't pay. Creditors hounded him, his so-called friends disappeared, and he found himself alone, bitter, broke, and humiliated. Richard and Laura's spiral deepened. Without Emma quietly paying their bills or filling their pantry, their finances collapsed. They sold off furniture, pawned jewelry, and begged neighbors for help. The people who once mocked Emma now whispered behind Richard and Laura's backs, disgusted at how quickly they had fallen. Emma didn't see any of it. She blocked their numbers, changed her address, and deleted every trace of them from her life. The walls of her new home were quiet, peaceful, a place free of raised voices and cruel laughter. For the first time, Emma truly breathed. She wasn't running anymore, she was living. And in that silence, she realized something profound. Sometimes cutting the cord wasn't just about ending the pain, it was about finally giving yourself permission to live without it. Her past was behind her, and she wasn't going back. Emma sat on the balcony of her new apartment, the city lights glimmering like scattered diamonds across the horizon. Michael leaned against the railing beside her, his quiet presence grounding her in a way no one else ever had. For the first time in years, she felt light, like she had stepped out of a suffocating shadow and into air she could finally breathe. The silence stretched between them, comfortable yet heavy with unspoken truths. Michael broke it gently. "You did it, Emma. You really did it." She let out a long breath, her gaze fixed on the glowing skyline. "I didn't do it for the money," she said slowly. "It was never about the inheritance or the company or even the house. I needed them to feel it. To feel what I felt that night when my head was slammed into that plate, when my own mother laughed like I was nothing." Her voice cracked, but she didn't look away. She had spent too many years silenced by shame. Tonight, she spoke her truth with clarity. Revenge wasn't about destroying them, it was about balance. About giving back the humiliation, the abandonment, the cruelty they poured into me. Now they're drowning in it, just like I once did. Michael reached for her hand, his thumb brushing her knuckles softly. "And now," he asked, "do you feel free?" Emma finally turned to him, her eyes shining, not with tears but with resolve. "For the first time, yes. I don't see them as my parents anymore. They're just strangers, broken people crushed by their own choices. The love I begged for my whole life? It was never there. And now, I don't need it." She thought of Richard's fury when she turned him away, Laura's hollow pleas, Kyle's arrogance shattering into silence as his world collapsed. Each of them had tried to hold power over her, to convince her she was unworthy. And now, each of them stood alone, powerless, ruined, forgotten. Emma leaned back, closing her eyes, feeling the night breeze against her face. The girl who once sat at that dinner table, humiliated, mocked, unwanted, was gone. In her place was a woman who had carved her own path, who had survived the fire of betrayal and come out unburned. She smiled faintly, the weight on her chest finally lifting. "I don't need their apologies. I don't need their forgiveness. And I don't need their love. All I ever needed," she whispered, "was the strength to rise without them." Michael squeezed her hand, as if sealing the moment with quiet solidarity. Emma opened her eyes, looked once more at the city, and felt an unshakable certainty in her bones. She wiped her hands clean of them, of the past, the pain, the hollow grasp of people who never truly claimed her. And for the first time, Emma knew she had won. Not because they lost, but because she had finally risen above them. Do you believe Emma made the right decision by cutting her parents out of her life completely, or should she have given them another chance despite everything? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if stories like this interest you, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next one.